Okay, patrons, we're going to do an edit today. I shot a lot of images this year or this fall, and I'm shooting as the sun is rising. So the sun's rising, but I'm shooting into the sun. It's just the way the location works. And one of the things about sunrises is to get the best light, you have to be in a position. For me, the sun rises in the east. I have to be either at the beach, meaning there's no obstructions, or I have to be on a hill where I get the sun before it comes up and hits other things. So if it hits the woods, I miss it. So I have to have these big open fields, or I can go like this location to the top of a mountain or top of a peak, but I have to be, think of a peak. If the sun is setting where the light is hitting my hand here, I'm sorry, where the sun's hitting my hand here, I have to be on this side of the peak, right? So I have to shoot back into it, because if I'm on this side of the peak, I'm in the shade, I don't get the light. So naturally, when shooting in hills, sometimes you're either going to have the sun at the side or you're going to be shooting back into it. So you can see what happens here, right? The sun hits these leaves in the background. I got this really open perch, a lot of megapixels here, so I'm going to crop it down. But I wanted to talk about like dealing with this shaded subject or this backside of a subject. So you're dealing in shade. The first thing I'm going to do with this is just crop it down. This will be a pretty simple image. You can do this in Lightroom. I'll put this image at the bottom. So if you want to play with this exact image, I'll put a link to the raw file at the bottom. Please don't steal it and put it in your calendars. That would be not nice. All right. I don't think this image is good enough to put in a calendar, but I kind of like it. What I liked is we got this little insect, and I have enough resolution to play around with. Now I could silhouette the bird, and normally we're just going to deal with the shadow sliders. So I could just silhouette the bird. I could just make the shadows darker and just give rim light to the bird. But let's see what happens if I can play around a little bit. So I want to get life to this, but I also want to bring out a little more of that bird. I'm going to start with just shadows. And look at there, we got it pretty good. This, by the way, it was hard to even tell what the bird was. This is a female black-throated blue. And you can tell, now that I've lightened it up a little bit, whoops, that little wing bar right there. It's not even a wing bar. It's just a little strip on the wing. Indicates a black-throated blue warbler. In this case, it's a female. All right, so let's get that there. Now, I need to do more to it, right? So what I could do is if I bring up the exposure more, I'm going to brighten the whole thing. I don't want to deal with that background. I just want to deal with the subject. And this is the real key. So I've brightened it as much as I can with shadows. So you could think, well, I'm kind of done. I've pulled up the shadows. We can still deal with just the subject. The background, the lighting on the background is just about right, by the way. So I don't need to do a whole lot there. Let's go to the background. So I'm going to go to subject, or I'm going to go to the selection tool. And I'm going to choose subject from here. So I've got a subject selection, same in Lightroom, same process. Whether you're using Photoshop or Lightroom, it's going to look the same. Here's the key. It's going to pull in a few other areas. So it pulled in this area, and it pulled in the stick, but I don't even care about that because I'm going to use a very powerful tool. If you don't use this tool, and I've mentioned it before, it is critical in this. What you don't want to do is take the backside of anything and just brighten it. If you brighten it, it becomes flat and it does not look natural. Things in nature need shape, and you shape with light. So let's just pull up the exposure and you'll see what I mean. You see how it's pulling it up evenly and it just doesn't look right. That does not look natural. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to leave the exposure where it was for now. And we're going to go to this where it says add and subtract. And I'm going to hold the shift key. Whether you're using Apple or Mac, doesn't matter. And whether you're using Lightroom or Photoshop, doesn't matter. I'm going to press intersect. And what this intersect selection is going to do is say, take the subject that I just had and now only apply it to the areas I add to it or intersect with one of these other tools. So now I'm going to take the paintbrush. I'm going to take the paintbrush. I'll make it a little larger. And I'm intersecting the paintbrush on top of the subject. So now only the areas that are getting both the paintbrush and the subject, I'm going to put the overlay on so you can see it. Okay, see that red area? The subject plus this paintbrush. So notice, I can go up here. It's not going to do anything. I'm painting right now, but it's not intersecting with what I chose the first time. So I'm subject select, intersect, paintbrush. And now I could start to give it a little bit of shape. So I don't want the bottom of the bird. I'm just going to start to play around with the top of the bird, and I can make it softer. Let's see what that looks like now. So I'm going to pull up the exposure. What you're going to see is, see how this the top is getting it? And I'm going to add a couple other elements here. So I got the exposure. Let's try shadows. And let's also try whites. So I'm going to pull up a few different things here. I'll take this mask off, or the overlay. And now I'm just going to see what it looks like as I play around with each of these sliders. And remember, I'm only going to start playing around with the top. It should not adjust the bottom. And if it starts to look flat, start to pull up the contrast. So notice that it's looking flat. So when I add contrast, it starts to look a little more natural. Now, in that area, I can take away. So let's say I'm like, the shape doesn't feel quite right. I'm going to go to the subtract brush. I'm going to hit brush. Now, anything that I paint will come off. So watch this. You see it coming off right there, right? And so just at the bottom, I'm going to take a little bit of that off. Now let's pull out. And let's look at the before and after. So that's the before. And you just have to see, does the shape look right? Does that look natural? You take those effects off. So it doesn't look too bad. Now let me just play around with some more global settings. So this is everywhere. I'm going to pull up the whites a little bit more, and I'm going to pull down the blacks. So this is adding contrast. You'll see what happens as I'm adding those whites and blacks. The blues are starting to get a little, in the background especially, they're getting a little strong. I can deal with that in a minute. And I'll just keep playing around here until I get it right. Now there's some blown highlights right here. So you can see these whites. And that's happening because on the subject mask, I increased the brightness. So I can get rid of those. I'm going to go back to the mask I had. So there's that mask right there. I'm going to click on it. I'm going to hit subtract. I'm going to take that brush again. And this time I'm going to subtract out these bright areas and see if that helps. Now it might not help too much. I'm going to try to get rid of that. If you hit the Alt key, this is a pro tip. If you hit the Alt key, and this does it for a lot of functions, it will reverse what you're doing. So I'm in subtract. If I hit Alt, I go to plus. And it's still kind of there. So now I need to figure out how to deal with this a little bit more. So I'm going to go down to this white slider. And I'll start pulling down those whites and see if that helps. It doesn't help because it's not on the subject, it's on the regular. So I'll pull up the whites, and now I'll go back to the regular, and I just got to pull down the whites here. You'll see it happen here, right? So I pull down the whites, I pull down the highlights. That should help some of that rim lighting, because that rim lighting was getting blown out. All right, let me pull out again. I'll hit, in this case, Control 0. That always goes to the full screen view. And let me just see how it looks. Pull up the exposure a little bit. So not too bad here. I got the shape. It's not gonna be hyper detailed. Excuse my dogs. It's not gonna be hyper detailed, but I'm getting there. But a couple things happened in this, and I'll pause this real quick and silence my dog. And one of the things that happened is when I started pulling down blacks and pulling up the whites, like stretching out that dynamic range or that contrast, the blues in the background got weird. And it's a really good example on this because there's only a few colors. So let's look down at, there's those blues. See them? They're just really strong. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to this thing called the color mixer. This will let me go into the image and choose individual colors that I want to deal with. I'm dealing with saturation because it feels too saturated. I'm just going to pull the blues down. So you see those blues? And notice that that helps a lot. If I wanted to saturate, let's say the yellows more, I could do that as well, or the oranges. But I think right now the saturation on the other colors looks fine. It just, the blue is a little too strong, so I'll pull that down. Okay, so you can kind of see what I'm working with there. And I think you could see everything. The only thing my face is covering right now, by the way, is the histogram. So hopefully you could see everything else. I can even slide myself over a little bit so you could see a little bit more of this. So let's look at the before. Big difference, right? So you don't get scared by this. Don't look at this and say, I can't see the bird. It's a wash. The basics for this is start with shadows and see what happens. So pull up your shadows. And there you can see the sliders change. So this is the original. There's the sliders. Shadows are way up. In this case, I had to pull down the blacks and white and the highlights a little bit because they were starting to blow out around the rim light. But I did pull up the overall exposure, did pull up the shadows, and then remember I went into the color mixer to deal with some of those blues. In this one, I also chose the subject. And to make sure I didn't get the whole subject, I just chose part of the subject by using the intersect. So I held down the shift key, selected the brush, and then just painted the area of the subject that I wanted. And then I'm going to go into Photoshop. And this is why I like Photoshop, because I can still polish it a little bit in Photoshop. So I'm going to take this to Photoshop. If this was your Lightroom edit and you're done, you're good. Be done with this. There's a couple little things that would be better in Photoshop for this. The first one is I got this tiny little stick up here. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove that. So let me create a background. So I take my layers. If you guys have followed me on layers before, you know this is pretty straightforward stuff. I'm going to take my remove tool, just make it to the right size here. And I'm just going to click it. I'm going to include a little bit of the bird. The remove tool does a really good job, and that's why I like this. It normally keeps the edge of the bird really well. You can see that. It did it perfect. So it's very, very quick. Here's the little bug he's chewing on. Is there anything else in here? Since I got the remove tool up, is there anything else in here? I'll leave the spider web. We could take that out if we wanted. All right, so pretty good so far. Now I'm going to choose another tool or another set of tools. These are just selective adjustments. So there's a lot of ways to dodge and burn. I did a video, if you're newer to the channel, I did a video a long time ago called Dodge Burn Saturation, and it's an action. So what I did is and I'll move my head so you could see this here. I'll move myself over here. I have an action over here called Dodge Burn Saturation. And when I clicked it, I hit the play button right down here. So Dodge Burn Saturation is highlighted. I hit the play, and it brought up a bunch of layers down here at the bottom, which are really, really easy. And the way to do this is just to take the brush, make sure it's on white, select the layer that I want. In this case, I want to make it brighter. I'm going to minimize the opacity. So I'm down to 20%. So now anything that I paint is going to get brighter. So now I can be real selective. So I want a little more light. Oops. I want a little more light down here. And I want a little more, oops. Oh, come on. A little more light right here. And I'm just selectively choosing where I want to brighten the image. So, notice my movement is generally around shapes and curves. So I'm finding areas where the light might hit it as a curve. And I'm just brightening it. I'll show you the before and after. I did it slowly so you don't see it, but look at the difference. All right, now I'll pan out, and I'll see if that's too much. So I'm going to go back to black. Now, black will remove anything. So I'm going to go over here, and I'll take a look at a couple areas where I'm like, yeah, it looks a little too strong. I'll start pulling that out. So I'll paint this. Let me go to black. There we go. I'll paint it in black, and I'll slowly remove some areas where I might have just gotten heavy-handed. All right, so that's the before, and there's the after. I also feel like the saturation on the bird, remember I pulled the blues down? I feel like the bird got undersaturated. So I'm going to go back to white with the brush. I'm going to paint in some saturation now right on the bird. So this should make the blues a little bluer, but just on the bird, because now everything I'm doing is detailed and selective. So I'm only choosing small areas to do this. So I've just saturated that area, and so far I'm pretty good. Now I just need to choose my final composition. I'm going to go in one more time. I'm going to go 7x5 on my crop. I'm just going to pull it down a little bit more. I'm going to bring it in a little bit more. I kind of like that yellow back there. I don't want to lose all of that. I want some of this bokeh. I want to keep some of that bokeh in. Maybe something like this. What do you think? Did I get it right? Something like that. Not bad. I'm going to do one final thing. I'm going to go back to Camera Raw. In Camera Raw, I like to add glow, like soft glow. So I'm going to save these layers. I'm going to take all of these layers and select everything that I've done. So I got all of these layers. Some of them I didn't use, but I'll just take them all. And I'm going to hit Control-Alt-E. It's a valuable shortcut. It's not a shortcut you're going to see on Photoshop tutorials. Control-Alt-E takes all of the layers selected and merges it to the top. This would be about my final layer. Now, I didn't use denoise on this. I'm not going to put it on this video. probably could run it through denoise. Maybe I'll do that in my final version. I'm going to go back to the camera raw gallery. If you didn't do those fine adjustments, if you're just working in Lightroom, maybe this is the last step for you. I'm going to take a radial filter and I'm just going to do a big soft edit up here. I'm just going to increase the light at the top. It should make a nice difference. Since I'm turning up those things, I got to turn down these highlights again because they're getting blown out on me. And I'll show you the difference that makes. See the difference? It gives it a soft, very soft, warm glow up top. Maybe I'll even play around with adding some temperature up there. So adding a little bit more of that sun effect up on top. What do you think? Before, after. Very soft, very realistic. Let's open that up. And there's the before and after. That's the finishing touch. Now that looks pretty good to me. You saw the edit, not a ton of work, right? I had a nice clean image. The learning for this is really when you shoot into the sun and you get the shadow on the backside of the bird, it could look really dark and it could be unpleasant. If you play around and if your ISO is low, that's why I like to shoot low ISO in this situation. The lower your ISO is, the more flexibility you have to edit the subject. If you start at ISO 64, pulling up those shadows, all of the noise comes out. It gets really exaggerated and it looks pretty rough. It's just up to you to decide how low of a shutter speed you can go to get your ISO down. I like to get my ISO in these situations down to 500 if I can. Lower is better. I really hate getting above 1600 when I know there's going to be some editing involved because I lose flexibility in the edit. So what do you think of that? Did I do the job? Let me go back to the original. That was some without these dodging and burning. And then you remember that original was just so dark. I should have left it in here so you could see. It was so dark you couldn't even make out what the subject was. So that's my final edit. Down in the comments, let me know. Was this helpful? Was there anything you learned from this video? Is there any other video you would like to see around this very basic editing? Trouble things that you have, things you're not sure about, you let me know. The raw file for this will be down in the description. Feel free to jump in there and download it. Like I said, just don't sell it. All right, you guys have a great day and enjoy the video.